What's up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. Dr. Andre Brock, professor, speaker, mentor, teacher,
shit talker,
author, shit talker, researcher. What's going on, Dr. Brock? How you doing, dog?
it's good. It's been a crazy few days because of the documentary, but other than that, everything's good.
Well, let's catch the people up. When you say the documentary, you're talking about the Black Twitter documentary on Hulu, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, man. You know, it's interesting. You and I connected, I feel like years ago. I don't know. Like, I get connected. I find myself getting connected with folks on socials. And transparently, I don't really be looking out for it. But it feels kind of like, it's kind of like a magnet thing. Like I find dope people and we just kind of end up vibing. We don't unfollow each other. And over time, you trade a DM or two and you end up being somewhat a friend. So, you know, I want to talk a little bit before we talk about the documentary. I want to talk about, you know, your work and your brand, right? So you're a Black academic, or what Living Corporate affectionately calls y'all is Black academics. And you've been in this space, in this researching space, in this academic space for a while, really at the intersection of academia and tech and community and maybe even anthropology a little bit, right? There's a certain level of like community and social interrogation that you're doing in the work that you drive, right? And so for those who don't know, you're associate professor of literature, media, and communication at Georgia Institute of Technology. Yes, I'm reading your bio, your profile. Talk to me about how you got into that domain as a space.
So I uh, started studying the internet when I was in English PhD at Carnegie Mellon. And that's where I really became aware of the digital divide. And the research about it at the time, largely, 90% of it was saying deficit model shit. Like Black people can't afford it. Black people don't have the literacy. Black people don't live in the right neighborhoods. And there was one study that made me really think, and it said the reason for the digital divide is that there simply isn't information out there that Black folk can use or can contribute to. When I brought that up to my English department, they were like, that's not really an interesting dissertation topic. So I switched schools and I ended up in information science, the School of Library and Information Science at Illinois, where they still didn't get it, but they let me write a dissertation on it. And so what ended up happening is I wrote one of the first dissertations on blogging and one of the very first dissertations on Black blogging, where I wrote about people who came online to write themselves into being following Hurricane Katrina. Right. And your mention of anthropology is interesting to me because half the time I try to be as thorough with my research as possible. So like when I wrote a dissertation about people online after Katrina, I started getting asked to write about Katrina. I'm like, I don't study Katrina, I study online. I wrote about The Wire, right? And how there was this blog called Freakonomics on the New York Times website that had an audience following The Wire. And people were like, well, can you write more about The Wire? I'm like, fam, I ain't seen the whole thing. I just wrote about the blog, right? So I try to be, and I say that to say I try to be thorough. Like if I'm talking about Blackness online, I'm always centering our online practices in our culture because that's crucial to my work. We're not new to this. In many ways, we are at the forefront of pretty much any technology or cultural thing you can name. And the same is true for technology. I mean, for information technology, right? And so, like, I've been talking with my boy Adam Banks, who's one of the first people to write about Black Planet, and we constantly marvel at how Black Planet and MySpace created this class of Black coders, right? These, and they were kids, right? But they were quickly able to pick up on HTML and sell their talents to people who wanted the web page with the rose picture of you and the rose in the glass and the auto playing music and the flashing curves. These kids quickly figured out how to monetize that and make money, and those largely became a tertiary wave of Black tech folk because there were people, and Charlton McElwain has written about this. There have always been Black folk in technology, right? Hidden Figures is a really good example of that. And there's been Black folk in the web, right? But those people have never really had a critical mass where you could talk about Black culture in STEM fields. There were always one of. And yet, social media brought this whole class of people who either were at the forefront when they were introducing it or quickly figured out how to become expert at it and then leverage those skills into careers. Right?
You know, so something like, oh no,
Go,
I'm
go,
sorry,
go.
I got excited. My
No,
fault. Okay, well,
go
hold
for
on.
it. This is a conversation, man.
All right, well, look, because one thing you said, so I'm one of those kids. Now, I'm not one of those kids who was coding the MySpace and the Zanga and the Black Planet pages, or the Mihente pages. Shout out Mihente.
Right.
But I was one of the people who would like, I'm paying you a bag of Fritos and like, $10 to like, you know what I'm saying?
Lunchroom
Put the
barter.
put the Pretty Ricky on. My background is my auto music, and then make sure I got the falling text looking like rain. Because Pretty Ricky had a song called "Your Love's Like Raindrops," and "Your Love's Like Honey," sticky and slow. And then I had the text falling real slow because I was playing like that. And then on my Zanga page, I had my name. The Zanga name was "Let Me Be Your Diary." And then I had Alicia Keys playing with the text moving side to side. Then I changed the whole thing up when I was like, I'm in my boom bap era, so let me put on "Go" by Common, and I'm gonna make sure I get this. So I remember that like all of that stuff was like it was code, and I remember I said, "Yo, show me what you're doing," and I'll never forget. Shout out to Kiki Webster. If you listen to this, shout out to Kiki. Much love to you. She showed me. And it was like, so it looked, I mean, it was, and funny because it was another language. It looked like a whole nother language. And yeah, I mean, to your point, like, I think there's this presumption that tech, and I wanted to really, I hope we like really continue to talk about this a little bit later. There's this presumption that tech is like this space of like order and control. And the assumption, I believe, is that Black people, their interaction with tech is more on the administrative or cultural side, but like there isn't necessarily an assumed connection between cultural impact and technical capability. There's almost like an assumption that, hey, white folks and maybe in those like, maybe Eastern Asians and South Asians are really the people that are driving the technical part of tech. And then we just sprinkle Black people over it to make it cool. But they don't actually understand like the functions of this technology. And to your point, we have a history of Black and brown folks engaging tech technically. Right. So the culture isn't like a seasoning. No. It's not something that you dash on at the end. It's actually the root of like everything that you're seeing and experiencing from like just a development perspective. So I just wanted to, like, when you said that MySpace part, like that just really, that stuck me. But no, like, I mean, to your point about like digital community and like, and I remember I was in high school when Katrina happened. And I remember an influx of students from Louisiana coming, and I was living in Dallas at the time, coming to our school. And I remember the blogging era, right? That was, and like, which has really like created so much of like foundational of the content we see today. When you talk about like the work and like the intersection of Blackness with like digital community, what is your perspective of where we are today? because things are much more algorithmically driven, right? Like I feel like the internet is not as dope as it was in like 2006. I feel like the internet was way, way, way more John Blaze than it is right now. Like
Yeah.
you're sitting at this as a little bit older than me, right? Respectfully. Also looking at this as a researcher and academic, right? Respectfully, Dr. Brock, respectfully. You're looking at this, and I feel like you're looking. I feel like you have a much better appreciation for the panoramic of where we're at. And so, like, talk to me about your perspective on where community is today. I mean, maybe we talk about the Black Twitter doc, but like, talk to me about how you feel about digital community today relative to like the era you were just talking about in like 2004.
Okay. I'm gonna digress a little bit, but I'm gonna get to your point, and I swear this is connected.
Give
One
it
of
to
the
me.
things that I One of the things I've been writing about recently, because I've been writing about the digital as a mode of Black life, is that those kids who did that coding in 2002, 2004, 2006, so Zanga, Bebo, MySpace, Black Planet, did something that had not been seen before, where Black folk wrote themselves into a medium using a technology in ways that were very different from the aesthetics of the web at that time or even the aesthetics of computing. So the South Asians, the East Asians, the white folk largely wrote to make technical communication either whimsical, because white folk don't necessarily see leisure as being productive, or they made it, they codified it to look like, say, a basic web page. There's a reason why white folk fled MySpace for Facebook, right? It was the cleanness, quote unquote, of the design. It was no longer this, uh, what's the word? Baroque, right? Combination of funk and color and movement and everything else. They went to these static ass Facebook pages because they felt that made them more mature. And the thing I love about Black folk is that we bring our what I call in my book an excess of life to everything we do,
Hmm.
right? And you can see that in the blogging communities of the 2000s, right? The early 2000s. You can see that a number of bulletin boards, although bulletin boards have never really ascended to be understood as Black community in the same way that blogs and social media have, because they were more insular, right? And then the social media of the 2010s. And so your point about community, but also your point about algorithms is really interesting to me, because
Hmm.
it's super easy to say it's the algorithm's fault, right? That we have what it is. And I've been talking about the web and digital differently, right?
Hmm.
Because we've always had algorithms. Facebook introduced the feed in 2008, I believe, right? And the feed, before the feed, Facebook had the wall. And the wall was simply a place where you went and people posted on yours and you posted on there. It was almost like leaving notes for one another. And Facebook's decision to implement a feed was an algorithmic decision. All of a
Hmm.
sudden, you got to see a wider range of stuff that they thought would cater to you, interspersed with things that they could sell you or that you were being sold by, right? So you started seeing ads start to show up in the thing and other things, right? And so that's an algorithm. But we don't
Yeah.
talk about algorithm in the same way because we felt we had control over that experience until we found out that we never did, right? And so the reason why I start by saying there's an ideology behind it is the ideology that Facebook kind of sort of pioneered, is that they sold us to third parties. They used us and sold us to third parties. And so the phrase, if you're not the product, if you're not the creator, you're the product, that's real, right? Um, and so what you've seen over the last now 15 years, or at least a decade, is that intensification of the engagement algorithm as a way to get people to respond so that they can then sell those responses to advertisers, or they're strip mining our lives to throw us further into surveillance machines, surveillance regimes that we see, where kids are getting caught up and getting catching cases because they're friends with folk who are in the life, the gang life. The kids aren't in the gang life. They may not even live in the same neighborhood as those kids, but because they're friends with them on social media, some kids are getting caught up in that, right? And so algorithms have made an association between us and some of the worst parts of modernity and capitalism, right? And I think in a way it has managed to do a lot to destroy what we thought of as community. This kind of came to a head when Elon bought Twitter, right? Never mind that Adam Mosseri taking over Instagram after they pushed out their original finders, has made Instagram a worse and worse space for the last 6 or 7 years. For some reason, people still never really consider Instagram in that way, but it's trash. It's fucking trash, right? When Elon took over Twitter, his record as an asshole, and an openly overt asshole who courted racists and alt right folk to come to the platform, helped people make the decision that I'm no longer going to support that. But we can talk about Jack Dorsey. Jack Dorsey is the reason why Twitter didn't shut Trump down until January 5th. They made a conscious decision, as did the folk at Facebook and Instagram, that they were going to deprecate democratic and progressive voices on the platform and elevate Trump and the people who follow Trump and the people who promoted all this MAGA shit, because that brought them money. Right? So when you talk about the diminution of community, the algorithm is complicit, absolutely. But algorithms are developed and maintained by humans. And the humans decided that they would rather have engagement than community on these spaces. Or, let's be fair, a particular kind of community gets all the play, and the people like us, we end up being like, well, damn, this neighborhood's showing what it used to be. What the hell, right? And so does that long answer make a little bit of sense though? I like to push it in context, right? Because there are a lot of watchwords that trigger people. Algorithm is absolutely one of those. We could even talk about AI, which is an algorithm, but they keep trying to convince us that it thinks, right? And so there are certain words that have garnered this association of belief, much more so than what's actually happening on the technical side or on the institutional side.
So no, first of all, I appreciate you taking the time to answer, and please like cook on. What I would say is, so there's an assumption, right, that and we do kind of, when we say the word algorithm, we typically treat it like this like tech boogeyman, right? Without really thinking, without really engaging critically or systemically on like who's creating, because algorithm is, to your point, it's rules. It's set,
a recipe.
It's a recipe. It's set parameters to deliver expected outcome, right? Like that's what that's what it is. And so like I think a lot of times I will say my default assumption, Dr. Brock, is again like the algorithm is like this like nebulous thing that's just kind of like repressing certain things and expanding other things without necessarily always considering the human element and intentional design of said function for a specific end. And so like to your point, because things are so nakedly extractive, right? Not to say that they were never extractive, but it doesn't feel like, when I say like the internet was so fire to me in 2006 or in 2003 and 2000 and like late 2002, it was because the extraction didn't feel so apparent. You know, I'm going on AOL chat rooms and I'm like talking to people and I'm connecting with people all around the world. I didn't have to pay for boosting on a post for something to get seen. Right. Like that language even was like so alien and foreign. Like it felt like the internet felt so democratic. It felt like everyone had a shot to go live, right? And when you think about like influencers and brands that are like really part of the culture today, it's because during that time, and I would also say like in the early 2010s, I think the internet was also different then too. But like you think about like, so look, we're talking about, so right now the Drake and Kendrick beef continues to be a thing. I mean, of course we know Kendrick smoked them boots, but like the people who got the biggest play during the season, right? It's been academics, right. It's been right. Joe Budden, right? And these are people who built their brands in the early 2010s. For Joe Budden in the late 2000s, right? He was doing he was doing user engagement before it was user engagement. Academics was creating content and streaming content and building out videos and content before all these models and machines existed. And so I guess for me, right, I think this might be easy time to talk about Black Twitter. For those who haven't seen the documentary, you know, what is your, and I don't want to give the documentary away because I want people to definitely go check it out. But, and you already talked about Elon a bit here, and I agree. He's a clown, a racist clown. You know, we've had Goddess Rivera on. Actually, we had Goddess Rivera on just a couple months ago. Again, right? Because we've had her on before. She's a friend of the show. Shout out Goddess. But when you think about like community today, to me, it seems very bleak. It seems very bleak because there's platforms out there that are trying to make it work and trying to build and stuff, but like it costs money to even get
Correct.
people to even join platforms. And there's a social engineering element too of just, I mean, like, look, let's shout out Spill respectfully. Spill. I got on Spill. And I get notifications on Spill every day. But I'm not using Spill. Hell, I'm not even using threads like that. Right? So like what is the hope and future of marginalized people trying to build community in a landscape that just seems like hyper capitalistic,
Hmm.
extractive? What does it look like from your perspective? Like, what do you think
So,
the future is?
so the growth of any online community, unfortunately, is not determined by how quickly it pops. They'll get a lot of initial users who are there for the novelty, but the folk who actually stay to build connections with one another, that shit takes years. So Black Twitter wasn't Black Twitter in 2006 when the site debuted, right? I've seen competing arguments. Toure mentions the BET Awards in 2009. I've seen a different mention of the Image Awards, but 2009 was that moment where we came together as Black folk who were using the same service to talk about something that was important to Black people in a space that was visible to people who weren't necessarily on the platform, right? So some of community is external as well as internal, right? But even then, Black Twitter really didn't coalesce, I would argue, fully to where people gave it credit until Mike Brown, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because people like to throw Trayvon in there, and it's true. The Zimmerman trial was crucial to the formation of Black Twitter. But before the Zimmerman trial, a lot of that coverage was happening on blogs and on Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was where the coverage was because Twitter wasn't mature enough and crucially didn't have a tipping point of Black people. So Spill Spill is what it is, right? They're Spoutable too. Chris Boozy is running Spoutable. He's a Black guy, right? Threads and Blue Sky. None of them have had the time. The only one that has is Mastodon, and Mastodon's technical debt is so high that I doubt if they'll ever see a concentration of Black people because we are now conditioned to want things to be designed in a way that allows for easy onboarding, right? Spill has mastered that. Threads has mastered that by making you have an Instagram account. Blue Sky, not so much, right? And so there's a number of factors to consider, but largely it's simply time. What will Spill be in 5 years? That's a really good question. But it's also a good question in light of the political economy of the situation. Will they have the capital to be able to flounder until people pay attention? And will they ever be able to monetize Black engagement in a way that current Wall Street and venture capital practices demand that sites be able to do the hockey stick? Right? So the difference between, I would argue, Black Planet, which was very different from everythingblack.com and Black Voices, which is one of the places I first got online, right? Is that Black Planet immediately ran into the hyper capitalization that Facebook and other sites were able to garner, and Black Planet could not, right? Omar went and got a PhD,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's necessarily connected, but it's interesting to me that a site that is as influential for what Black people are doing, the founder moved on, right? And when a founder moves on, the person whose energy and vision made the site happen in the first place, unless you've got somebody who also has that vision, there's going to be interesting things that happen with the site, right? And so there's never been a level of investment, and this is uh, across the entire Western civilization. There's never been an energy and investment into Black owned properties or vehicles or technologies or anything that white folk will see. Never. And Twitter is kind of stands out to me because there was a moment when Goddess came on, and TJ Adeshola talks about this too in the documentary. No spoiler, but that Twitter actually turned around and realized that Black Twitter was doing something unique and interesting for a social media platform. Uh, they encouraged their own employees to go back and care for that community,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is, I think, as crucial to get that level of institutional support is super crucial for any Black online community to ever thrive. It's going to happen organically, but you'll never get the scale of a Black Twitter unless somebody at the top says, "Hey, let's put more money in this." And so, I recently, I've been paying attention to this cat named Shaft Leslie Miley, who did a lot of the architecture for trust and safety. And he mentions in a tweet recently that a lot of the stuff that was going on with Black Lives Matter, where they were catching online harassment, his team was responsible for dealing with that level of stuff, right? There's very few people who will say Black Lives Matter was important to the strategies of their platform, right? And so there's something kind of unique about Twitter that led Black Twitter. It's not just the people who were at the forefront of it. It's not the influencers. It's not the blue checks. There were also people who were technical behind the scenes who were doing support of what was going on, and that's super crucial. Does Phil have that? Maybe, but I looked at their terms of service and I'm not necessarily convinced, right? We'll see in 3 years. I think 3 years is a good enough period to see whether or not something's going to have staying power where people feel like they can build lives there, right? But right now it's too early. The other thing I'll add, you didn't ask this, but I think it's super important.
Yeah.
The pandemic is still affecting us. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about community and how it feels like shit is really bleak out here, there are a lot of people still acting out from the social isolation that was forced upon them by the pandemic. There are a lot of people who realize that they have a void within themselves, and they are filling that void by lashing out at other people. So the level of vitriol across the platforms that we frequent, because none of us just use one, right, has increased because the algorithm brings us that vitriol because it makes them money. Does that make sense?
Yes.
They've always been nasty folk. Ask any woman who's been online for any amount of time. There've always been raggedy ass dudes that come and they mentions wanting to do this, that, and the third, or even threaten them, right? If they don't act right. Right meaning they don't give the guys the attention that they want, right? So women can tell you this has always been trash. If you talk to Feminista Jones or Mickey Kendall or so many other non-binary folk who have been in the trenches, right? They'll tell you it's always been nasty. But the nastiness has now expanded beyond people with marginalized identities to where everybody's getting heat, right? And that leads to people's perception that online environments right now are more toxic than they've ever been, right? And to a certain extent, I agree with them, but I also ask people to examine the context, right? One of the texts I teach for my class is a text from 1992, before there was even social media. This is all like a technology called Multiplayer Online Dimensions, MUDs. And the famous article is called A Rape in Cyberspace, 92. No bodies, it's all text, but this guy comes into this space where people are congregating, kicking it. One person's like, I'm a piranha, and another person's like, I'm a giraffe. And, you know, they all doing their mystical, whimsical type things. And this guy comes into this space and says, I am pulling this particular person to the side. I am taking her clothes off. I am doing X, Y, and Z to her. And it's all coming up on the screen. So I say this to say that online violence has been a thing because people are violent, not necessarily because of the online. And that's crucial to remember when people say, oh, Twitter's a hell site. Twitter been a hell site, man. Where you been, right? And so the thing to me that's crucial, though, is to talk about Black life. The one thing I really enjoy about the documentary is that it talks about the ways in which we bonded with each other, not over trauma, because I would argue Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd things are trauma bonding experiences, right? But over shit that is funny. Zola is wild. Temecula is funny as shit. The nigger Navy, hilarious, right? And those are the spaces that allowed us to build the resources so that when shit did get heavy, we had already bonded together through laughter, right? And then these political things were able to energize us to take it to another level. So again, long answer. I'm sorry, Zach. I can't help it. It's that day.
You're a professor. I'm used to y'all talking long. It's okay. And it's a podcast. That's what it's for. So
edit that shit.
I'm not. I'm gonna keep it right here, and I'm gonna keep that, and we're gonna mark it explicit. So here's what it was. You know what I love though is the through line I'm hearing is that, and we're seeing that we even saw this like with the 2016 election, but there is this tendency to blame tech. And I just, earlier I said it earlier with like the algorithm, right? It's just a great real-time example. To blame tech for human behavior. And it's like, hey, humans have been humans. Now, the difference is I think what you've been saying, and I believe most people who are on these platforms experience is certain the the rules have been adapted and updated to incentivize some of the worst behavior, but that behavior has always been present, right?
Always, always.
You know, it's interesting. You know, we talk about. I love your answer around spill, and the fact that hey, it hasn't been enough time. It's only been so much time. Um, I'm curious about it too, because we're in a season where like it's just more expensive to have a business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like things being subsidized in the early 2010s allowed for a lot of things to flourish and grow. I mean, like Uber, a lot of these things that we spent money on that were relatively cheap or at least affordable that are now more just as expensive or more expensive as the services they claim to replace. It's because these organizations are now in a position where they have to prove value. They have to actually get returns. It's not about just getting audience anymore, right? So we're running at a deficit for several years is no longer an option. And so I am curious about what it looks like for some of these organizations, some of these companies. What does it look like for them to grow? And then we have a whole conversation about VC and how exploitative that is, and like, is that even a pathway of anything viable for for the type of time that we're looking for? You said that it's interesting what you said. You said enough funding to flounder, right? Just like, hey, what is it like for you to exist? Because maybe they're just kind of mid for like the next 2 or 3 years until something really crazy happens, like a cultural lightning rod happens, and then all of a sudden we're running the spill. But for that to happen, you got to have the funding, the bread to even be here, right?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. I mean, Twitter was a podcasting company before they had that famous meeting where they decided to flip it and try something different. They were called Odeo, and at the time they were kind of ahead of the curve. Nobody was thinking about podcasts like that in 2006, right? We had online radio. Shout out to Shoutcast and all those other radio stations that got me through grad school in the 2000s, right? But the idea Joe Budden had of getting up there and simply running your mouth and talking for an hour about shit that really what didn't pop. And so in 2006, Twitter's already having to pivot, and they had the money to be able to do so. That's crucial. That's really crucial. The only comparison I can make is there are a number of failed sons, white folk who fail upward, who continue to get incentivized for multiple ventures. The easiest one I can reach for out of memory is Adam Newman, the cat who ran WeWork. So all that investment in real estate properties, claiming that he was going to reinvent the culture of work, shit failed. Guess what? He's already being funded to tens of millions of dollars for his next venture, like none of that ever happened. Show me a black capitalist, a black tech CEO, a black developer that's been. It just don't happen for us like that. It's one and done. Even Henry Louis Gates has had multiple attempts at building out a web presence, from MSB, the stuff he did for MSBET, to Africana.com, to The Root, right? And so, like, even the people who are celebrated by whiteness and us don't necessarily get that type of funding. So it's a crucial thing to necessarily have to happen. It's crazy to me. And so I think I answered your question. Who knows? I run mouth.
So it's funny though, because to that end, right? And this is not to be like super Debbie Downer, but when I look at the Henry Louis Gateses of the world, to your point, the people that are mutually celebrated by in white and black spaces, and they still don't get on, it's like, well, damn, like, what am I doing? Like, let me just get in where I fit in, because if he can't do it, right? Like, if he can't make it happen, then what are we talking about? I mean, this dude had a beer summit, right?
Right. With the fucking president.
With the president. This
so happened it was a black president.
This happened it was a black president, right? But it's just crazy to me. Like, that's just really, really. I find that. I mean, it's so that's why when I look at this, and that's like I said, it feels bleak, is because it's just like, man, like, where are the paths? Like, where are the paths for community in a way that's meaningful? And again, like, those communities exist. Like I said earlier, there are influencers who really were consistent in building their individual brands, and then it just blossomed into something much larger today. But when I think about like a space, and I'm not talking about a space where it's like a few thousand people, I'm talking about a space where it's like millions of us in a space, or several hundred thousands of us in a space. And it sucks because, what it feels like is like kind of taken away from on the technical side. Let's talk about like the social engagement side. It feels like black folks, we do this thing. This is not me wagging my finger at black folks. Like, this is not that type of podcast. Go listen to something else. Y'all trying to get that. But what we do is we like kind of just we'll migrate space to space and make it super fire. Then watch it blow up, get monetized, and then we just sit. That. Right? So that's where I'm kind of like, even with Twitter, it's like just what it exists, what it is today. I'm like, man, I see a path where that it could still be very engaging, and of course, like we're still over there. Yeah. But I don't even want to. I would love it if we all just did a mass exodus.
To where?
I know.
Who ready for us? I will say this. At this point, I've been on Twitter for 16 years, 17, right? I am now seeing 17-year-olds come on the service and like, why are these 30-plus-year-old people still on here, right? And to me, that says a lot about the longevity of Black Twitter. That it's so difficult to define that people from different age groups can still find value in it. Because we 30-plus, and I'm way over 30, but we 30-plus-year-olds are still finding shit to do on there that's entertaining and interesting to us, while these new folks are finding different ways to be themselves on the service. Those of them who do use Twitter, because we could talk about TikTok. Right. Mm. And to a lesser extent, Instagram. I will say, though, there's a class of people, there's a number of people who get overlooked in this conversation. And Catherine Knight Steele has written about them really well. The young sis who ran Concrete Loop, the young sis who ran Crunk and Disorderly, and the young sis who ran Nicole Bitchie. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And all three of them kind of walked away at the height of their site's popularity. They weren't social media, they were blogs with huge commenting sections where people built all kinds of connections, making mad money from sponsorships. In 2009, I saw the young sis from Concrete Loop at a conference called Blogging While Brown. Mm-hmm. Shout out to Gina McCauley from What About Our Daughters, right? And she sat on that stage and she said, if I put up a post about Beyonce, I can get $100,000. Because Beyonce was that big. In 2009, right? Because it draws that much attention to the site. People will come and see it. The advertisers and the music companies knew that they would get attention to their thing. But after a while, folk get tired, right? Because running a social site has a different debt than the technical debt that we assume many sites tend to accrue, right? You have to constantly deal with personalities who want to bring the worst of themselves to deal to other people. And so it's a lot of content moderation. Right. And that stuff gets on your nerves. I have a roster of people who left behind thriving sites simply because they couldn't take it anymore. Right. And I think that's something that also needs to be considered. Maybe Jack is not that crazy, right? The fact that he went to India to find himself and shit, because he had to deal with the madness that is both his investors and the user base of his website. I'm not talking about the black people. I'm talking about the mother folk. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's something to consider as well. Black people do have a we off that mentality. Right, that's old shit. Right, we don't do that no more. But also in the communities that we love, we still here. So 17 years of a recognizable Black Twitter, that's fantastic. There are still people on Black Planet who have original accounts. Black Planet is now 24 years old. Think about it.
Yeah,
right.
Straight up.
And so we will stay if there's enough incentive, if we built the connections. But in this current this fiscal and technological environment, that type of loyalty is not rewarded because they want to be able to extract something from people who are there to live their lives. And that part, I think that's unsustainable, Zach. I really do. So people are now going to their group chats, right? Until they figure out a way to monetize that. But right now, group chat is the biggest thing.
Well, you know what's interesting to that point, right? Like, then there's Discords and stuff, but you see advertising is coming into Discord.
Advertising, and they're selling content to AI companies.
Oh my gosh, man. So look, I would be remiss before we get you up out of here. You know, you're a Black professor sitting at a white institution, PWI. Talk to me about how you're navigating this landscape of anti-affirmative action, anti-DEI. What does that look like in your day to day as you do the work that you do, and you are who you are? Like, what is that? How are you navigating that?
So before I make it about me, shout out to the folk on campus who are doing these pro-Palestine demonstrations, right? Because many of them are suffering real-world harms over a situation that's not even in our borders, right? Kids are
Mm-hmm.
getting evicted from campus housing and everything else. And I'm not gonna lie and sit up here and say I'm on the front lines with them. I'm not. Uh, what I do have to navigate though is I live in a state, Georgia, which early on took the step of saying they could no longer use ideologies like diversity, equity, and get what the I stands for,
Inclusion.
inclusion, right? As a mode of communication about hiring or teaching or any other institutional initiatives. They have not, Georgia has not yet gone as far as Florida and now North Carolina, right? Not to mention
Mm-hmm.
Texas and other spaces, but it's coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm talking to my colleagues there who are forced to navigate. If you write about critical race theory, as I do, how then do you write your research in a way that keeps you from having the state come down on you, right? It's something that we're seeing folks try to figure out as it happens. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the other part too is it's fucking I'm sorry, it's rough to be faculty these days because many universities would rather hire adjuncts and contingent faculty rather than put people on the tenure track. For every time somebody retires or moves on to a different university, it's really hard to get those lines replaced because they'd rather bring in people who don't have the protections that tenure line faculty have, right? And they're doing their best to erode those protections. So there are many things to not like about being in I'm in an R1, but being in higher education in general. That said, I can't think of any other place that would allow me to write about Black life and get a steady paycheck.
Hmm.
Right? Shout out to the people who are doing books and getting contracts with the trade publishers to write about Black life and Black joy. But I
Mm-hmm.
also know that's a 1099 hustle. I don't want that life.
Yeah.
I like a
Yeah.
steady salary, and so the fact that I get paid a steady salary, even though work is still something that is not going to sustain me or allow me to thrive, I don't take that for granted. Right. I will continue to write what I write, how I write, as long as I can at this place until they no longer value me, and then I'm on to the next place. Because there's someplace else that will. Hell, I'll go to Canada. You hear that, Canada? I'll come if you pay me, right? And so I don't know. Academia offers a lot of freedom, right? Even though, like every other job, it has its problematics, and some of those problematics, some of those things seem arcane to people who are on the outside, right? The idea that even though I'm tenured, I now must undergo a 5 year review sounds crazy to people who get performance reviews every year, right?
Yeah.
What you
Mm-hmm.
mean 5 years? Fam, we used to didn't get none. That's why there's legends of white folk who have been tenured and not done anything for the last 30 years, right? Tenure
Mm.
was a kind of protection. And so, to answer your question, the forces of evil are levied against us. They're assembling in ways that are pushing us back into an era where there was no DEI, right? Because if you think about it, that's largely a recent thing, thanks to the decision Backey versus University of California Thurgood
Yeah.
Marshall,
I remember
right?
that.
That's 78, right? That's not that long ago, right? And so we will be back in a situation where the things that we write are not valued by the university, but that's how Black Studies came up in the first place, right? And so we'll figure out a way, but that's what Black people do. We figure out a way, and so just shout out to Georgia Tech because apparently their first living graduate just handed his granddaughter a
Granddaughter.
diploma. It's
Yeah.
2024, fam. Your first Black graduate, and from you in the state of Georgia, is still alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so, the game is the game. Um, I'm sure. I mean, I'm looking at the tech layoffs and how so many of those STEM companies in 2020 was like, we're all about diversity in education, kneeling on the floor with the Senate, like George Floyd. And now those are the first departments that got cut,
Right.
the first.
Right.
And then they follow with all the other people who were older and making too much money. And the people who want to be remote, all them folk got fired. You can't tell me that's capitalism and racism, right? And so, yeah, the world is complicated.
Dr. Andre Brock. Look, man, you know, internet tried to conspire and not have us do this interview. I'm glad we finally able to sit down. I count myself I count myself blessed to have you. hopefully we can do a part 2 and 3, because I know especially as we talk about the involvement of AI, and I really think it's a mechanism. It's another data gathering mechanism. Especially, I don't know if you saw the news recent. I think it was very recent. Apple Siri is going to be Siri and OpenAI, and so that's just so concerning to me. You think about like how much more data we're now giving this organization that hasn't shown itself particularly responsible.
Correct.
Correct. And frankly continues to degrade. And yet now we're about to give it all this other information. And so, I appreciate you is all I'm trying to say. Again, we're about to have a whole nother pod. I promise we're going to stop. We're going to let you go. But
it's fine. I will say though, please bring somebody on who can talk about the contradiction between Apple's policies where you can tell the apps that you don't want to track them. Apparently in 18, which is about to be released in a few weeks, iOS 18, they're about to put a thing where you can select the portions of the websites that you no longer want to see. Goodbye, Taboola. Goodbye, pop-ups sign up for our website before you even get to surf what we're trying to sell you. All that shit's about to go, right? So how do you put that in conversation with the fact that OpenAI is already getting its ass handed to them in lawsuits about their acquisition and theft of content, Reddit, YouTube, social media that they took without permission, right? How do you put those two things together in a way that's workable, right? So please bring somebody smarter than me on to talk about this, because I talk about Black life and I'm really focused on that. And I don't see any real possibilities for Black life in our current AI environment. And perhaps that's another conversation we should have, right? I know it's a lot of educators out there who are like, our kids need to be prepared for this new AI thing that's coming down the pike. And I'm like, remember when they told the kids that they should go to coding academies to learn how to use Microsoft Word that they could be better information professionals?
Come on. Now look.
The cycle is always a cycle, right?
It's like a competition. It's like a competition to stay in serfdom. Like, hey, go learn this new thing, because then they can pull you from this field to help you do this thing. But now they made a new tool to make the thing that you spent all this energy, degrees and everything on, in their mind obsolete. I don't believe it makes it obsolete, but the controlling powers do. And so now you ass out with a bunch of information that now a bunch of executives think that they can just feed into a algorithmic model, going back to connect everything together.
They ain't got to pay benefits to the AI, and right now people are throwing money at them. So it's in an Uber situation, right, where Uber and Lyft and all those other gig economy companies were able to throw billions of dollars of venture capital to break already existing institution. AI is doing the same thing with no real discernible value once it has to actually start making money. We'll see. Dr.
Brock, it's been a pleasure. God bless
Always,
you, brother. We'll talk soon.
Yes, sir.
Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.